Welcome back, my friends, to Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catello. Today, we are on my second episode of my series centering on the subject of design and design methodology. I'm very pleased to have my guest, John Kaloustian, join me, who just happens to be a local furniture designer. Now, credit where credit's due, I came to get introduced to John through my friend David Chow, who my listeners may remember from my episode on how AI is impacting graphic arts. John, as I said, represents a perspective surrounding furniture design, which has always been fascinating to me, and in this episode, we will dive into John's conceptual approach and methodology of his designs. John, thank you so much for offering your time and insight for this design series, and absolutely please tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
Hey, Scott, thanks for having me here. And it's nice that we're both in the Detroit area and share our love for the arts and design. So I am actually a product designer and industrial designer. So I've designed all sorts of products. From bike accessories, automotive components, eyewear, exhibits. I'm self-employed, and I've been self-employed since, not long after I got out of college. And I then started to consult. I worked for Steelcase right out of school, and then went on my own and consulted to a number of the furniture companies, as well as most of the exhibit firms in Detroit at one time, and a number of other corporate type entities. So anyways, I tend to be more of a hands-on approach to what I do. I have a studio where I have a shop and I build my prototypes, and I try to really develop an entire piece when I work on a design. So it just seemed over time, with furniture being in our vicinity, that I stuck with that. And over the years, and plus I have a love for furniture as well. I collect it, and our home is full of vintage pieces. So anyways, I hope that gives you a little bit of insight. I also teach at the College for Creative Studies, and I've taught there off and on since the mid-'80s, and had the pleasure of having a number of really talented students. And I still, as of today, still teach, which I really enjoy, primarily product design. And I've taught a little bit with transportation, but I've had a number of transportation designers come through as students. And again, I'm in awe of their careers and what they've done. So with that being said, I hope it gives you a little bit of insight of my background.
I appreciate that, John. It's certainly an interesting journey, as most designers take. Let's start the conversation by discussing your personal approach to design. But first, before we get into that, let me ask you, what types of furniture do you design?
So I primarily design contract furnishing, which is for offices, you might say. It could be for restaurants, but mainly for commercial use. Could some of the pieces bridge over into your home? Yes, they probably could. In fact, I have some of my own pieces in our own home. So, but really the products that I work on are made for commercial spaces.
Well, I thank you for that. That gives a little bit of a context of what we're looking at. And again, for this design series, we're trying to distinguish your approach and your concept to design. Is there a way that you could walk the listener through how you approach designing furniture?
Well, in my case, I work on a couple different ways. I might speculatively work on a piece that I may take out to a company to show them, but I also may work on their criteria, because they may invite me to work on a particular category that they're looking at, or they may have a competition. So it just really varies depending on the client, what their needs are. So oftentimes, it's predicated on a particular need in a category, and that category might be contingent on that it's more price sensitive, or that it's a higher scale, upper scale piece too. So that can vary greatly, let's say. So, it just, again, depends on the criteria of my client. Now, each company has different processes that they're really good at, whether it's wood or it's metal or it's injection molding. So that too is kind of a criteria of what I look at first when I go in and design a piece, because I really design for manufacturing, which is important. A lot of individuals will go and work on a particular piece of furniture, not realizing that at the end of the day, it has to be made for a reasonable price that a consumer will actually purchase. When you look at the balance between how creative you get with a piece, and it really depends on where it might be going. Today there's a lot of concern with the environment and recyclability and reuse. So at any rate, the design should always match the longevity of the piece, which we hope it becomes a classic or can last on. So, I think it's really important to look at design and furniture and a lot of products to be as timeless as they can so that they can meet a goal of having a long life.
Well, it's definitely a good approach. And it sounds like the clients approach you with some parameters, correct?
They do, yes. Oftentimes they may have a particular category where they see a space that they need to fill. And that space could be based on features, function, in other words. It could be based on a price category, or it could be based on a particular specific use that they see a shortcoming in their line. So, and then sometimes I may have a piece that I develop and I look for the company where I see that space that's empty within that company. And I have a piece that I feel could fit there for them. So it's like when a company designs, let's say they're in stack chairs, typically companies won't have one stack chair line to be a player in that particular space. They'll have multiple lines of stack chairs in that particular category in order to compete, to bring clients to their particular company to look to for that product. That's pretty common in our industry, where it seems like companies kind of have their space where they have a lot of strength in. And it could also be for specific use too, whether it's outside the office, it's in a restaurant or in a waiting room. And again, it just depends. Now, the larger companies, they try to cover all those umbrellas with what they have.
So it sounds like a lot of the times, like you illustrated, the program is given to you. How often in your work will you come up with the concept yourself?
That's harder to do. And I know a lot of young people who kind of are trying to get the chance, their first lucky hit. And it does take trying to do some pieces on your own to either show to a potential client your ability or to get a piece in. So for me, I'm always working. It just seems like I always have my mind going. So now, of course, I have enough of a client base where if I develop a piece and I see a fit, I can take it out there. I want to say it's kind of a 50-50 thing for me. But, for most people who are starting out, they're going to work on pieces on their own in order to not only show to a potential client, but also to develop their skill. I mean, when I first started in design and furniture design in particular, I had to go out and actually prototype a number of the pieces that I worked on. I paid for tools for bending plywood, components where I could go and prototype a particular seating product to take out and show. So it does take a little risk in order to get any kind of reward.
I can see that. And it sounds like in your work, John, balancing creativity and practicality is paramount. So how do you balance those two?
Well, of course, it's nice to come up with something that's innovative. That's always great. I mean, we all try to strive for that and have our own personality to our style. But ultimately, for all of us, whether it's I'm sure a piece of architecture or a piece of furniture or some other product, the ultimate judge is the user or consumer. So that's the real reward over time if the piece works for them. So, the balance is to try and get form and function, of course. Sometimes I always say that we always say form follows function, but sometimes function can follow form, if I could put it that way. So,
Sure.
You can be a little bit more creative with what you do.
It's interesting, John, like how these, and I was kind of expecting this to happen through this series, but my first episode with Jim, we had talked, we're both in the field of architecture, and we talked about some of the constraints that are put on us as architects during our projects, time, money, resources, client demands. For yourself as a designer, how do you handle those kind of constraints?
Well, of course, time constraints are always there for every project. Sometimes they're set unrealistically in the beginning, and then sometimes it seems like things drag on to where you want to kind of get on with it. But I would be preaching to the choir to most design individuals out within companies about that. But of course, there's the budget, and then there's just constraints, the ability to have people meet up and to get prototypes made. All those things kind of affect the timing, but then it does seem as though cost constraints are also really important. And up front, we kind of have a vision of what we think the piece might retail for and where we'd like to be at in a cost basis. Sometimes that gets eroded where the piece does go up in price. So, you have to figure out ways to kind of bring it back home to where it should be. So then you have to balance how many elements that you can bring into it, maintain that creative vision. It's really, that's the challenge, though. It's a worthy challenge.
You bring up an interesting point, because I tell clients all the time that you should never ask an architect to price something. And I say that, in all seriousness, but, somewhat kiddingly too, because we're good at like giving ballpark figures to things based on, historical projects that we worked on. But I'll ask you this question, as somebody who's in the field of design in a different way. Are you able to price something and be relatively accurate when it comes to furniture?
I think I can get pretty close, and that comes with experience. There's no way around it without having seen pieces being built and getting that kind of experience. And then, of course, clients have their own processes in-house, and then some things have to go to the outside vendors. It can be a bit of a revolving issue because you don't always know, especially right now where we've seen inflation go up. So, we're a world economy. And within that world economy, things are a little bit fluid. So you try to get it as close as you can.
Well, that seems fair. In your opinion, John, should design prioritize aesthetics or utility, especially as it pertains to what you're doing?
Well, it has to pertain to utility. That's paramount. It's like, so in other words, the most important criteria on a chair is that it's comfortable. Now, that's not to say that chairs should be uncomfortable, because in some cases, I can remember working on airport seating years ago where they didn't want the chair too comfortable because they didn't want people to lounge in the waiting area, but rather be up at the restaurants. And so that criteria can change depending on what the piece is. But comfort, utility, ability to use it, and durability, length of life, human factors, all these elements are really important. But yes, on top of that, to make it attractive is really important because, of course, that does determine the personality difference in pieces.
Well said. So you mentioned people, and obviously that's your end target, as it is for me as well. Do you get immediate feedback from your designs? And I'm sure you do. And can you share a design where you prioritize solving a certain human problem?
Well, I've worked on a number of different products, and we have to fit products to people, which is really important, and that seems to always be a resounding theme on furniture, because whether it's the height of the desk or the depth of the chair or the comfort of a lumbar support, those elements have to be considered, and you have to know what those dimensions are and use them and consider that first when you approach design. So I've worked on school seating. I worked on a chair called the X-Stack for Colas, and in that piece, the goal was to make the chair very comfortable to be able to be used in a classroom, but yet durable. So that particular piece had kind of a cold molded back, where it was molded out of a more rigid plastic with a softer thermoplastic where you actually sit. So again, it had comfort with durability. And then, of course, there were a number of accessories too that it had that tailored it to the classroom. So again, it's specific to the application, that you try to allow the features to support the piece and that reinforce how it's used.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely with you on that.
Yeah, I'm sure with architecture, you must go through the same, some of that criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. So one of the things that I find is somewhat of a challenge. I think it's one of the biggest questions and things I'm trying to learn out of this series, out of the various designers I'm talking to, is where do you find inspiration for your work? And in short, what inspires you in your design?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because oftentimes when I'm teaching school, I tell students, don't do too much research right up front. Kind of start sketching, and without your preconceived ideas being contaminated by all the stuff that's on the internet, because you might look at it and say it's all been done.
Sure.
So in some ways, I say maybe you should just start out doodling, just to get it going, and then maybe look around and see what's out there. The other huge benefit that I've had is I love to travel, and I've had the opportunity to explore, or broaden my environment. So I think that's really important for individuals to try to get out of their own little realm of where they live, and especially for a younger person to travel where they still have that opportunity to do that, where they're maybe not so restricted by owning a home or other elements that keep them in place, finances or whatever. That save up and travel, because I think that really does help to broaden one's environment and influences their design and ability to look beyond their own space.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's important to get out there in the world and kind of discover new cultures, and more importantly, new and different ways of thought.
Yeah.
Because it only adds to your own sort of toolbox, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing is we try to get out to trade shows too, such as the Consumer Electric Show or the Hardware Show, or shows that a houseware show in Chicago, things that, again, maybe are even out of your circle of products that you specifically work on, but that broadening environment can bring back, a greater context to your design.
Agreed. And it sounds like, John, from just learning to know you a little bit prior to even this episode, it sounds like you've done this a little while. Having been in the field for a little bit, what have you learned? What are some lessons learned that you've kind of come across and got beyond in your career?
Well, it's starting any kind of business or any kind of taking any kind of risk. That they always say no pain, no gain. And I think that's true. You have to take a little bit of risk in what you do with your design work. And again, back to my comments earlier about prototyping it or developing a concept. We don't always know if it's going to be a successful piece, but I think for a young person, they do have to take some risk in the beginning of their career, whether it's what they work on or maybe the job that they take. That we don't always know what's going to pan out. So I think that's important, is to be open to taking some opportunity risk.
That's interesting, John. And it begs me to ask you the question, what was one of the biggest risks that you took, and how did it end up, and how did you get past it?
So one of the risks I took early on is I actually, I went self-employed and consulted, but I also thought it was important to have a place to prototype pieces. So I took the risk of, buying different equipment that I needed in order to make and facilitate a scale model, a full-scale chair, whatever it was that I was working on. So I actually, it became a huge benefit because I was good with working with my hands and model making, that I could then create an actual piece of whatever it was that I designed. And I could do it fairly quickly. So, even today, I still have I think a pretty nice prototype shop where I can go in and develop something quite quickly.
Well, it sounds productive, but it actually sounds like a lot of fun too, John.
Yeah, it's great because, as product designers, and I see this with my students too, we always talk about what's the process. And the process is, ultimately we do sketching and we do CAD rendering and print up models, but really at the end of the day, it's an actual tangible product that is the finished item that we designed. So it's important to be able to somehow create that, facilitate that, to test even, market test it before it even gets out there.
Absolutely. And one subject that keeps coming up, and it seems like every episode I do, John, is the subject of AI and surrounding AI. So given that, it seems like I have to kind of ask you, has AI sort of entered into your design or into your production as you sort of produce and design your pieces?
Well, I don't use it particularly for myself, but being a professor, I certainly see it in our world. I guess I kind of put it this way. It's a tool that, like when finite analysis came out, it didn't necessarily put engineers out of business. It became a better tool for them to go back and refine and engineer something that they were working on. And I think AI is something that can sit with design and substantiate where they're going, if the direction is correct, or to see if there's something they're missing within their design. Certainly, I think if it's not fed more material in the future, it's going to stagnate. The other thing is we also have to consider that you can't get a patent on something that's not invented by a human being. Is companies want to have IP and have their product unique. If everybody's using the same AI program, they may not get that unique item that they were hoping for.
No, good point. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think AI is, in fact, another tool. And given that statement, John, how do you stay current with sort of the new trends? Like your sort of area of design, well, it seems like to change as fast as like IT changes. At least from my perspective, how do you keep up with sort of the technology, the tools, the trends of furniture design?
Well, it's manufacturing that's really important, because I think there's trends in manufacturing that we have to keep up with. Of course, there's not so much software embedded in furniture, I wouldn't say. or maybe electronics aren't necessarily embedded in furniture, but furniture has to support electronics, let's say. So in other words, it's important to be current with what's out there and then also have an imagination for where it's going to go. Having been involved here in Detroit with the automotive industry, we see that how electronics can be integrated into automobiles and how it's actually changing the automobile. So furniture doesn't quite have that integration, but who knows? In the future, as more things become smaller, there may be, a greater integration with some of that technology.
That makes sense. So one question I ask everybody, and I'm going to ask everybody in this series, is what advice would you give to a new designer that's entering your field?
So I would say it's important to stay versatile because we don't quite know where the market's going to go. I mean, things are fluid. One thing you might count on may not happen. So it's important to stay challenged in your ability to work at a number of different disciplines and to be open to understand that one particular door might close in a product category and another one opens up. So that it's important to stay versatile. I have students that have a love for one particular category of design, but that can be disrupted by an economy timing, So I think it's important when you approach your education that you have somewhat of an open mind to be able to work on a number of different products.
I think that's great advice. And I think back to my time in design school, which is probably not too dissimilar than your own, John, where, when you're in design school, you're getting the purity of design. And I state that because a lot of people sort of gravitated. I had a friend that went into, as we got our bachelor's degrees, she went into clothing design. And I had a friend that went into computer animation. And a lot of people splintered off because they got that sort of raw design tutelage that really helped them.
Well, I think that's true. Today it seems like algorithms, because memory is, they can embed so much more memory in a chip and a microprocessor. And so algorithms are changing products. And so, for me, when I was in school and came out, the personal computer was everything. It changed the whole future. But I think for somebody today who's coming out of design school, it's algorithms and the ability to embed, smart technology within a multitude of products. That will be the future, because it will be applied to everything from, medical equipment to just really everyday inexpensive products.
Right. It'll be interesting how it's going to grow organically through that.
Definitely.
Well, I appreciate your design perspective. And one last question I'm going to ask you, Jim, which is a question I ask everybody. What are some of your favorite musical artists, and what kind of songs are your favorite songs?
Oh my God. I guess I don't have one in particular, but it's interesting. I remember being when I was younger, there was always kind of that difference between your parents and you with their taste in music, kind of. But I would say today with my kids and my taste, we're pretty much the same. So
interesting.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily have one particular artist that I like or listen to new, but I have a couple of kids. I have a son that's 27 who's a product designer, and a daughter who's a fashion designer in New York City. And it seems like we, and my wife too, we all enjoy the same taste in music, because we'll hear each other's playlist and be copying from one another. So maybe we copy from theirs more than they copy from ours, though.
Interesting. What's some of the stuff that's on your playlist?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look.
That aside, we'll table that one for now. But is there a place, John, that the listeners can see your work, or do you have a website or something that people can?
Oh, sure.
Look you up.
They can just type in my name, johnkaloustian.com, and they'll see some of my work right there, or just search my name and they'll see some furniture. And so at any rate, yeah.
All right. Well, John, I can't thank you enough, and I'll ask, do you have any last thoughts or advice to the listeners?
I suppose I would say it's really important to enjoy what you do. When you're giving the best hours of your day to what you do at work, it's really important to like it. And so if you're not feeling that kind of love, then go back and evaluate it and figure out a plan to get it where you can really like what you do. And of course, attitude is always important towards what you do as well.
Right. And I'm certainly not going to beat that advice. That's great advice, John.
Yeah, good. Well, anyways, all right. Next time I'll be prepared with my playlist.
Oh, that's quite all right. Well, John, I can't thank you enough. You had a very interesting perspective, and certainly the work you do is equally as interesting.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks. All right. Well, hey, have a great day, Scott. And I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share some of my design experiences and approaches.
Appreciate your time, John. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again, John, for your insight and educating us and further providing some interesting takeaways regarding your medium of furniture design, such as taking risks in your design and in life. Not always are you asked to make furniture comfortable, which I found interesting. Fitting products to people. And staying challenged and versatile. So thank you, John, for those good points. I appreciate your continued support for Where Do We Go From Here with Scott Catello. And don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends, as you'll all want to definitely check out my next episode in this series, which I'm very excited about, where I will be speaking with Tracy Rees, a renowned fashion designer local to our area who has provided custom dresses for the First Lady Michelle Obama, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Oprah Winfrey. So definitely stay tuned, as you'll not want to miss this episode. As a reminder, this podcast can now be heard on all of your favorite podcast and music listening platforms. And keep those questions coming and show ideas coming at my podcast email, catelloscott@gmail.com. Now for the background music for this particular episode. John was a bit reluctant. However, John did send me an email after our taping and let me know that he was a big Neil Young fan. Well, I have to say, John, good for you. And Neil Young is also one of my favorites. So since you're a Neil fan, I recorded a bit of my version of one of my favorite Neil Young songs, especially the version he performed with the band in The Last Waltz. If you haven't guessed it yet, it is Helpless. Till next time.